Right, all you glorious gamers out there, welcome to the PlayersToo Podcast, the video game podcast for gamers like you, by gamers like you. You can find PlayersToo on all the social media, that's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com, that's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it really helps us out. It does a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And while you're over there as well, if you could leave us a little review, it just helps us out even more. And if you've already done that for us, thank you so much. You are an absolute legend to us. Alright, and on with the show. My name is Mark Henderson. With me, as always, Mr. Lewis Camley. How's it going, Lewis?
It's going very well, Mark. Good to be here again. Good to see you. How are you getting on?
Yeah, not bad. It's been a very busy week of moving stuff around in my flat, which has been incredibly unexciting. But yep, that's what I've been doing for the vast majority of my week. But Lewis, nobody wants to hear about that nonsense. What have you been playing?
Well, Mark, in much more exciting news, I took delivery of my very own PlayStation 5 on Friday night.
Woo!
Yeah, so just a few, well, basically a week after you got yours, mine's arrived, and it was actually a day earlier than I was expecting it, which was great. So I have spent some time playing the PS5, Mark. That's what I've been doing this week. And I have been jumping around in different games, which I'll come on to in a wee second. But as you did last week, I'll just kind of run through my initial thoughts. I've probably spent maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 hours or something like that with the console now, actually hands-on playing it properly. So not a ton of time, but a decent little block to try different things out. So far, I've got to say, like, it feels very much like evolution and not revolution to me. There's not a lot of things that box is doing that I'm completely stunned by or that feels really remarkably different to what the PS4 was doing. But obviously, as we all know now, the key improvements, the speed of the thing is just wild. I actually went from rest mode into one of my games, which will come on in a wee second, and to go from my television being off to literally where I paused the game and where I left the player character on screen within seconds is quite something. I hadn't really realised it was going to impact me the way it did, but it was quite a moment.
There you go, man. Wouldn't you say that is a bit more revolutionary then?
I mean,
because you said this thing is doing a lot of stuff that the PlayStation 4 was doing, and then you've just described something that the PlayStation 4 absolutely cannot do.
Well, that's it. I mean, there are certain key features that do elevate it, absolutely. I mean, I'm not for a second saying they're the same machine, obviously not, but so much of it is just like improvements and little changes. And to be honest, I think we've just not really had the time and had the experiences yet with it to see what it can really do. But things, yeah, like the speed of just moving around the whole thing and jumping in and out of games is something to behold. The DualSense, yeah, is incredible. That does feel like a game changer. It worries me sometimes because I think that the trigger buttons, the haptic feedback you're getting there, the adaptive trigger setup is incredible, but it feels like it could break at any second when you're really tugging against it. I just hope that they're well built.
Yeah, I'm thinking that the build quality of those will very soon be put to the test, I think. And I hope that it does stand up to the scrutiny as well, because it is such a big part of the PlayStation 5 and the PlayStation 5 rollout. So if they're breaking all over the place, that would be very disappointing indeed, you know?
Yes, similar to the Joy-Con drift issue. I mean, if those features start to fall apart, then it won't be good. No indication of that so far. I'm not saying that to raise it as an issue at all. It was one particular bit in Astro's Playroom, which was the first game I tried out on the PS5, and it was, ironically, the first time you feel the tension of a bow, which is obviously the example that they gave us ad nauseum in the lead up to the launch of the PS5.
Absolutely, yeah.
At that moment, I was like, this is incredible. This actually does feel really good. But if I push this too hard, will it just break?
No, I sort of tried this out and I was like, can I just hammer this down? And you sort of can. I mean, at a certain amount of pressure, it does clearly just go away. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They've obviously thought that people will be idiots and try and do that. You know?
Yeah.
And it won't just break. But there's a surprising amount of tension in the triggers, I found anyway. There's a particular bit of Astro's Playroom, I don't know if you want to go into your experience of that right now, where you are a little spring.
That's right.
And the feeling on the trigger when you are that little spring, it really feels like a little spring is in your triggers, but it's not.
It's magic.
It's magicless. It's absolutely magic.
Yeah, well, on that, yeah, I'll dive into some experience with the games. So yeah, as I said, I started off playing Astro's Playroom, which is the tech demo pack-in game, effectively, that the PS5 comes with. And I typically do ignore those games, I've got to be honest. I did on the PS4. Often it seems like a throwaway thing. I would definitely recommend anyone that picks up a PS5 does set aside. Just a couple of hours. You don't even need to play it all, although as you platinum, there's definitely a value in doing that.
Yeah, there's a real game there, to be clear.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly,
we are going on about it as if it's a tech demo, and it absolutely is a tech demo as well. That's also unavoidable, but there is a real game in it as well,
Yeah, it's a simple but really charming platformer, basically. It's not got tons going on mechanically, but as you were kind of pointing out last week, some of those little nods to PlayStation history, and also some of the artifacts that you find where you get just these big 3D, really well rendered models of objects of PlayStation history, from consoles to controllers to seeing some of the PS1 stuff in particular, like when the multi-tap appeared. I was just kind of man, like this is how far we've come. What a mad thing.
Remember when that was a thing.
But I've also been playing a couple other games, Mark. I spent just a couple of hours with Bugsnax.
Oh yeah? How did that go?
It's fine, to be honest. Like, I'll go back to it, I'll play a little bit more. It's not doing tons to grab me, and to be honest, by the look and feel of it, it doesn't feel like a PS5 game necessarily. It's definitely run fine on previous gen. It's a straightforward...
Yeah, I don't think it's pushing the system very hard.
No, exactly that. It's a straightforward indie puzzle game, and it's fine, and I'll play a little bit more of it. It's been given away free just now on PS Plus, so there's no reason to kind of avoid it, but yeah, it's fine. It is what it is. Definitely worth a look at some point, but it's not going to change or radicalise your gaming experience. I suppose the game that should be doing that for me, and is to a certain extent, is Spider-Man Miles Morales.
Yeah, so this is what I want to hear about, man. This is what I want to hear about. Come on.
This came with my console. I bought it bundled in, and I've only played maybe 3 hours or something so far, and a lot of that is obviously the tutorial stuff at the beginning, so I'm not too far in, but so far, I mean, it's exactly what you would imagine it to be, Mark. It's PS4 Spider-Man, but enhanced, improved, graphically incredible. I should say I've been playing largely on the fidelity mode rather than the performance mode.
Oh, interesting.
I wanted to try them. I figured I should see what this box is capable of in terms of visuals before I start wondering too much about what 60 FPS is going to feel like. But, I mean, the game is fast-paced. It's full of style in a way that even I keep going to say the first game, the original game, the Spider-Man PS4, it feels to me more stylish than that because it leans into things like Miles's love of music and the type of music that he listens to. So where the soaring score of the PS4 Spider-Man game was a really big part of that, that's kind of all been replaced here by like modern rap and urban music. And that, to me,
really,
that
is so interesting, man. I have not heard a single person say that, and that is really, really interesting.
I mean, I don't know if it's there throughout the whole game, but it's a big part of the opening sections, and it really adds something. Swinging about at night in this wintry New York with that kind of sound coming into your ears, particularly if you are using the headphones, it just gives it a different feel altogether. And on that, as I say, I've not played too much so far, and so I can't really say too much about big story beats or anything like that. The one big change really is the introduction of these electrical powers in the combat that Miles has, what they call Venom powers, which is fine. It's simply a little spin on the combat that was there before. I've not seen anything too radically different about that. But it gets you so deep with the feels so quickly. That is the thing that we said quite a lot about Spider-Man PS4, was that it's surprisingly, for a superhero game, has a story that will make you feel things and it will make you connect with Peter Parker in quite an emotional way.
Yeah, it was one of the best Spider-Man stories told probably until Into the Spider-Verse came out.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, it's interesting that you mention Into the Spider-Verse, because it's obviously that film is so tied in with this game. You can see it just in the really beautiful animation on Miles as he's swinging around. There was a thing that I noticed was happening earlier when you can do the perch takedowns where you kind of zip a guy up and web him. He kind of does a thing there where it looks like he's about to stagger and fall off of the pole that he's on just because he's imbalanced. Like, they've really gone for that. He is fresh and new to this, and he's not very well experienced, and they've really played that up in the animations. But there's just this scene near the start of the game, and I put a wee snapshot of it onto our social media the other day. It's not a spoilery thing. All this is a family meal that Miles and his mum and a couple of other characters have at Christmas. And honestly, man, the way that scene made me feel, the way that it felt and looked like a real lived-in living room with a fire and a record on and a beautifully decorated Christmas tree and lovely food on the worktop, This might sound crazy, man, but it made me want that. It took me into that and just made me think, like, God, I wish I could have a normal family meal this Christmas. It's few and far between does a game make me really feel like a very personal emotion like that. Games make you feel sad, ecstatic, joyful, whatever. But it was the first time in ages I felt like, Christ, I just want to go and see my family, and that game made me feel like that. And that's within the first couple of hours. And so absolutely kudos to what they're doing with the emotion in Miles Morales. It is absolutely up there already with what Spider-Man PS4 was doing. So more to come, but I'm really enjoying it so far.
That's amazing, man. That sounds really good. And for someone as well who was, I'm not going to say on the fence about it, because I knew that you always wanted to play that game, but I never really thought that you were massively excited by it. So it's good to hear that you're having that like strong emotional response with it. Do you know what I mean? That you would maybe have been having in like the PS4 Spider-Man, which I mean was absolutely great, you know?
Yeah, I totally concur with that, because I was expecting to like this game fine. I thought it was going to feel like DLC, and to a certain extent it absolutely does. But as long as I enjoy it on that level, I'm fine with that. You know, that's exactly what I want from it. So fair enough, you know?
Awesome, man. Well, that's extremely, extremely good to hear. On that note, time for the news. Alright, news item number 1. An internal Sony document has stated that single-player games are thriving, Lewis, and explains how PS5 activities cards came to be. The document was a presentation that was circulated amongst, quotes, a select number of developers in 2019. The presentation started off with a sort of flippant quote saying that everyone knows single-player games are dying, and showing a graphic apparently of GTA 5 and Black Ops 3, which were dominating the sales back then because of their multiplayer. However, Sony then goes on in the presentation to explain that in reality, their internal tracking data showed that single-player games were thriving, and in fact, gamers were regularly spending more time playing offline than they were online. So just on the single-player games first and foremost, Liz, to be honest, this sort of confirms something that I had suspected for a very, very long time. Despite the constant narrative over the years that, single-player games are dying or they're dead or everything's moving to multiplayer and yada, 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 they clearly aren't. And beyond the fact that they are clearly not dying, they are actually still the preferred way that most people seem to be consuming games if people are more regularly playing offline by themselves than they are playing online in multiplayer situations, you know?
It's sort of surprising and not surprising, this news at the same time, because I think you're right in saying that like there's such a narrative here that multiplayer games are the future and single-player games are kind of on the way out, even though PlayStation over the last generation in particular have proven that that's not the case at all by the quality of the games that they're putting out. But to me, it is still a little surprising to learn that that is the case, that more people are spending more time playing offline than online. I guess when you start to think about the difficulty of getting a squad together and aligning your diaries to play at the same time, and that you can see why multiplayer, particularly team-based multiplayer games, maybe aren't eating up as much time as it feels like they should be. But I'm still a little surprised by this, to be honest.
Again, it's sort of like you're saying, I'm surprised and I'm not surprised at the same time, because this is very much my gaming habits, you know? Like, I very much spend a lot more time playing offline than I do online. Most of my friends are like that, but there does seem to be this overarching narrative that more people play multiplayer games, you know what I mean? And not just that, multiplayer communities are very present online, I will say, you know what I mean? The Destiny community, the Call of Duty community, the FIFA community, do you know what I mean? The whole esports side of it and streaming side of it, all these multiplayer games are like omnipresent, but in actual fact, your normal everyday gamer tends not to play in that way and does tend to play more as a personal experience, which is how I tend to enjoy video games as well. So I am a little surprised, I suppose, but in a lot of ways I'm like, yeah, this makes complete sense to me, you know?
Yeah.
So the presentation, as I said, goes on to detail how these activities cards on the PlayStation 5 came to be, and they seem to have come around actually from surveys of people who played single-player games. Apparently these surveys found that the main issues gamers were experiencing playing single-player games were that they didn't know how much time they would need to get the next level done or to get to the next objective, and they wouldn't want to play unless they had 2+ hours free. Also, if they were stuck, that they had to scan through very long videos to find tutorials and whatever, probably on YouTube, let's face it, in order to find a solution to whatever was causing them problems. They also wanted to be able to engage with the game socially without the risk of spoilers. And gamers had forgotten what had happened the last time that they played the game, sort of implying that there might have been quite a big gap between the last time they had a gaming session and this time, and they hadn't quite remember what was going on in the game. And I really think that PlayStation have addressed a lot of this stuff in a lot of ways. In the activities cards, I mean, specifically for Astro's Playroom, I went in and tried to use the help to find, it was a little jigsaw piece that you just had to find in the level, that I genuinely couldn't find, and that video actually did help me and took me to where it was supposed to be, you know what I mean? So it did work. And the fact that in the activities cards, if the game allowed you and if it is appropriate within the game, you can jump to tasks directly. I know that this is something in Spider-Man Miles Morales. If you wanted to jump to a specific mission, you will just be at that mission, you know what I mean? You'll just be in the mission. Astro does work slightly differently to that, and it's interesting that these cards can be implemented in different ways in different games. But more to the point, it's nice to see that those activity cards were introduced to tackle specific problems that gamers had been having while playing the PlayStation, you know what I mean? It's a sort of data-driven solution, I suppose. And it's just nice to see that it wasn't just an off-the-cuff idea that somebody had, it was really there to try and help players play more games the way they wanted to play them, you know?
Well, exactly that, yeah. It's just an attempt to smooth out and simplify the experience to a certain extent. And it's good that this... I mean, I think this information effectively leaked. I don't think Sony actually put it out there, but...
No, yeah, sorry, it should be saying, so I'm actually referencing a Vice article who leaked the information, and a VGC article as well, who also did like a nice discussion on the subject as well. But yeah, this was information leaked. Well, this wasn't something that Sony had come out with. And I don't really understand that, because this to me looks really good for them.
That's what I was going to come on to say there, yeah. It feels almost important information to me, because when we first started to see things like the activity cards and the in-game help and those kinds of things, I did feel a little bit like, these are cool, but are they actually all that useful? Are people going to want them? And particularly that thing of jumping into different points in a game, it seemed particularly like you would be able to do your side missions or your side objectives through that really easily and not have to actually traverse a game. In particular with Miles Morales, that would cut out a lot of the fun of the game. But if there is actually data there saying that those are things that are stopping people from, to my mind, particularly the issue would be of actually beating a game. They might well go in and play it for a bit, but they do drop off, they start playing something else. How do you get them back in and back up to speed? And actually this data lines up with the actions that they've taken for the PS5. And so, yeah, I kind of do wish Sony were like, this is the design idea, this is why we did these things, and this is the ways that we sort of expect that you will use them. Because it turns out people actually do want them.
Yeah, exactly. Sony's marketing's weird, man. I don't understand them at all. I really don't. But to me, this is a good news story from PlayStation. So well done that you've designed your PlayStation 5, one, with single-player games in mind, which I absolutely love, and two, by trying to help gamers play those games as much as possible, the way that they want to play them as well, and trying to facilitate that as much as possible. So 2 thumbs up from me. Alright, news item number 2. Marvel's Avengers has not broke even on its development costs, Square Enix has confirmed. The company has posted operating losses of around 7 billion yen, which is around $67 million or £50 million, for the 3 months ending September the 30th. Square Enix president Yosuke Matsuda has said this regarding the losses.
The HD Games sub-segment posted an operating loss as initial sales of Marvel's Avengers were lower than we had expected and unable to completely offset the amortization of the game's development costs. Absent factors associated with Marvel's Avengers, the sub-segment would have been in the black. In addition to the amortization of that game's development costs, another significant factor associated with the title was the fact that we undertook a major advertising campaign at the time of its launch to make up for the delays in our marketing efforts resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic.
Now, amortization aside, whatever the fuck that is, this game apparently cost $190 million to make and sold 3 million copies, and whichever way you cut it, that is not enough. The game also suffered from the usual games as service technical issues. It had a severe lack of endgame content, made worse by delays to said endgame content, and also the next gen versions of the game have also been delayed and are still not out. Square Enix remains hopeful that players will return to the game, despite the fact that only a month after the game's launch, it had less than 1,000 concurrent players on PC, and there were also matchmaking issues on Xbox and PlayStation 4 as well. So, as of this recording, according to Steam charts, the game currently has a 30-day average of 844 players, which really isn't good.
No.
But that is actually up unbelievably from the middle of November, because there were regular dips below 400 concurrent players, with the occasional dip under 300 concurrent players that I found. But Lewis, do you think this game is going to have a second coming, like No Man's Sky and Rainbow Six Siege? Or do you think that this game is going to go the way of Fallout 76 and Anthem? Just before you answer that, I will say that I checked Fallout 76 on Steam charts as well, and it had almost 10 times as many concurrent players as Marvel's Avengers does. So that tells you the sort of situation that we're in here with Marvel's Avengers.
Yeah, I mean, that is pretty damning information when you consider how old Fallout 76 is now and how, relatively recently Marvel's Avengers came out. Do I think it's going to have a second wind? I think it will trundle along. I don't think it will go quite the way of Anthem, where it just becomes the industry joke to a certain extent, because largely of that IP that's attached to it, that you're always going to have fans. And it should be said, people are enjoying it and people have been enjoying it, just not anywhere near enough people have been enjoying it, basically. You would like to think that when a next gen version comes out, and maybe when they can do like an ultimate edition with a lot of, if not all of the DLC characters and all that stuff packed in, maybe that would be enough to draw people in. But I think there's been a cloud over this game sort of since it was announced. It's not ever really cleared, and I don't really see that they actually have a plan for how they are going to turn it around,
No, unfortunately this doesn't look great for this game, let's be honest here. But if a franchise was ever going to do it, Lewis, Avengers is probably a good franchise to put a bet on, you know what I mean? So I've not lost all hope in this game, and as you said, players were enjoying it initially when it came out, but I think that enjoyment came to a real grinding halt when it came to the end game content, and I think that is really where they were losing a lot of people. And that is sad, because it's a huge property. It could have been a huge IP for Square Enix and Crystal Dynamics, again, the devs behind this. But yeah, it's not really hit the mark the way I'm sure they were hoping that it would, and the way that many were expecting that it would, Alright, news item number 3. Phil Spencer has once again hinted at an Xbox app for your TV. Phil Spencer has said this in an interview with The Verge.
I think you're going to see that in the next 12 months. I don't think anything is going to stop us from doing that. I thought what you said about the TV was spot on. What we used to call a TV was a CRT that's just throwing an image on the back of a piece of glass that I'm looking at. Now, as you said, a TV is really more of a game console stuffed behind a screen that has an app platform and a Bluetooth stack and a streaming capability. Is it really a TV anymore, or is it just the form and function of the devices that we used to have around our TV consolidated into the one big screen that I'm looking at? I do think you're going to see hardware change. Frankly, even on the console, we see this. One of the primary things that people do on game consoles is watch video. They watch Netflix and Disney Plus and Hulu and everything else. What it's meant is we actually have to build out an app platform inside of a game console so that these providers can go and build their Spotify app and the different things that run. There's real hours and hours of usage on these things, which my N64 didn't do that. The first Xbox didn't do that.
Spencer had also hinted at TV streaming sticks for their xCloud service a couple of months ago as well, and back in 2016 had been working on a streaming stick themselves as an actual piece of hardware, but that was subsequently cancelled. Microsoft have also partnered with Samsung earlier this year over xCloud, and Microsoft have plans to integrate xCloud with Facebook Gaming. They are also bringing xCloud to iOS now through a web app similar to what Amazon's Luna is doing. He also talked a bit about how he sees the service as a, quote, hybrid environment between the cloud and local computing, which means it could still be tied to hardware specs to a certain extent. But Lewis, it does sound like in the next 12 months we are going to be seeing a lot more of xCloud. Considering all these deals are in place, all these things that are happening, how often Phil Spencer is now mentioning xCloud, I think that this might become a real focus for Xbox. Now that the new console is launched, this might be the sort of next big push from them, But I don't really know how you feel about this. Are you excited to buy xCloud? Are you interested in xCloud in any way? Do you actually anticipate using it in the real world?
That's an interesting question, because overall I'm excited about it, or rather I'm interested in it. We probably throw the word excited around too much, but the thought of it and what it's possible to do with it and the different ways that Xbox themselves are going to push it, like this potential TV app or sticks or partnerships and built in on Samsung TVs or whatever the hell's going to come down the line, I think all of that is really fascinating from the perspective of someone who's interested in video games as a platform and as an art form and all those things. But, I mean, right now, no, I don't think I would use it because I'm not going anywhere that would facilitate the need of it almost. I can't really imagine what function it would serve over...
Yeah, I must admit, lockdown is sort of kneecapped the functionality of streaming at the minute, yeah.
Yeah, obviously, hopefully, that's going to come to an end at some point soon, so...
We've got vaccines now. We've got vaccines, people.
Hopefully. But,
there's light at the end of the tunnel, potentially.
And Big Phil is waiting at the end of that tunnel.
Yeah, with Xclouds. Yeah, get your new Samsung TV.
But yeah, until there's kind of that need, it's hard to say with any certainty that I'm particularly really excited about it. But I think it's an inevitability, and I do appreciate what Xbox is doing in terms of trying to put their system effectively everywhere, whether it's the high-end box, whether it's the cheap Series S, whether it's an app, whether it's a stick, whether it's on your Android, whether they're going to jailbreak the iPhone and get in there. You know, they are going hell for leather about putting Xbox in front of you no matter where. And if the tech works, and Stadia, if it's proven nothing else is proven that the tech does work, then it's hard to see why it wouldn't be a success for the people who need it to be. It might not be huge take up originally, but over time people will start to use it, and I can't imagine that we wouldn't be part of that.
Yeah, I mean, I largely agree. I think I'm a bit more interested in this sort of stuff than you are, generally speaking. But I really think that what Xbox is doing on the services side is just fantastic. It really is. It is quite literally game-changing, pun fully intended, as always. And I think that they are pushing the industry forward in a big, big way by a lot of these moves that they're making, you know?
Yeah, and that's high praise coming from a Sony pony like yourself. Like, it is, I genuinely mean that, though. It is important that no matter what system we're on, that we do look at things like this and say, this is about the industry. This isn't necessarily about one platform or the other, one box or the other. This is what is going to change about gaming because of moves like this, you know?
Oh, absolutely, man. Yeah, this goes way beyond Xbox versus PlayStation, you know? I mean, way, way, way beyond this. This goes on to change gaming as a platform entirely, you know what I mean, or how we think about gaming, you know. But Lewis, speaking of Xbox versus PlayStation, news item number 4, Microsoft have been looking into why PlayStation 5 has been outperforming the Xbox Series X on certain games. Now, there was a whole thing about this online. It basically started when Digital Foundry was analysing performance of both consoles. They did this over a bunch of games. I watched them all, actually. I think there was DMC 5, there was COD Cold War, there was Dirt 5, there was Watch Dogs Legion, there was AC Valhalla, and I think they've literally just posted another one of Borderlands 3. It seems as though in some of the games, specifically DMC 5 and AC Valhalla, specifically on high frame rate modes, the PlayStation 5 had been outperforming the Xbox, and in some situations quite substantially outperforming the Xbox. However, massive capital letters, exclamation mark, however, there was a lot of fracas around this, basically about nothing, I think. Because it seems as though these frame rate drops and these performance issues have already been patched out on the Series X on AC Valhalla anyway. So for me, this doesn't seem to be a fundamental issue with the Xbox Series X. It seems to be an optimization thing and something that is easily fixed. And the main thing I would want everyone to take away from this is that whether you are on PlayStation 5 or whether you are on the Xbox Series X, these games run fantastically well on both. That is what I took away from the Digital Foundry. They are basically neck and neck, by and large. Right now, the PlayStation does seem to be performing better on these high performance, high frame rate modes. But when it comes to resolution quality modes, then the Xbox probably has a slight edge there because with its slightly better ray tracing. However, I think that because Xbox was billed as, quotes, the most powerful console, I think some were expecting it to be noticeably outperforming the PlayStation 5, when in actual fact that simply isn't what is happening just now. And as we've been saying all along, the raw numbers, the teraflops and whatever, do not tell the whole story, you know? And it's also worth remembering as well on points like this that the devs have had very little time with these consoles in reality, and most devs seem to have had more time with the PlayStation than they have with the Xbox as well, which is something to keep in mind. As the generation goes on, you will find that the devs are able to much more effectively optimize for these consoles more and more. So basically what I'm saying is this was blown out of proportion a little bit as far as I'm concerned, and whether you're an Xbox gamer or whether you are a PlayStation gamer, you should be very happy with your console right now because they both look fucking great.
Yeah, you're spot on with that, Mark. I mean, it's easy to get caught up in these kind of console wars. This game runs ever so slightly better on this machine than that machine stuff, and that's obviously been going on for years. To me, part of the reason this story got as much traction as it did, other than just people looking for an axe to grind against one or the other console, is that it's very slightly embarrassing for Microsoft that AC Valhalla, which is a game that they do have quite a close marketing tie with, was one of the games.
Yeah, all the marketing was around that,
But, I mean, like you say, these are teething issues. This was part of what I was saying, weeks and months ago about not necessarily thinking buying a console on day one is the smartest thing, because there's always issues like this, and they're particularly now in this era of day one patches and constant system updates. I mean, both systems have had at least one, I think several updates already. They are fixing things.
Both consoles have had major updates already.
Yeah. And probably most games, or many of the major games, will have had patches already and updates. This is all just optimization. It's smoothing things out. It's working out once these systems get into the wild where the bugs are, what things aren't working the way. I mean, Quick Resume was being reported as something that wasn't working as well as Microsoft obviously want it to. I would not hesitate to buy a Series X because of that right now, because it will get fixed. There's no doubt in my mind that these major features will all be much smoother in 6 months' time than they are just now. It's just the natural process of putting out tech, particularly in a pandemic environment where you couldn't get dev kits out very easily.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that if a year from now you're still experiencing quite significant frame rate drops on the Series X in comparison to the PlayStation 5 in a similar situation, then we might be having a different discussion. But right now, this seriously is nothing to worry about. And whether you have a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series X, I think you should be pretty happy with your system right now. Alright, finishing off as we always do with a couple of shout outs. Shout out number one, first podcast of the month, and that means free games, Lewis. Free games. On PS Plus, you're getting Worms Rumble, which is the Battle Royale Worms game, so far as I understand. That is available as a PS5 version, but you can also get a PS4 version as well if you're still on the PlayStation 4. Just Cause 4, which is a PS4 version, and Rocket Arena, which is a PS4 version as well. And on Games with Gold, you are getting Raven Remastered, Bleed 2, Saints Row, Gat Out of Hell, and Stacking. Still no Series X games on the Games with Gold, interestingly, and I still debate how long that is going to be around, because, man, Xbox have just not tried at that for a very, very long time.
What's your take on the PlayStation games this month, though? Any interest in any of those?
I always quite like Worms, man. Honestly, I do. Like, me and my friends used to play Worms Armageddon quite a bit. I think that was given away as a free game at some point as well, down the road. So yeah, I mean, I would be genuinely interested to give that a go, but I mean, am I going to play any of these with any earnest? Probably not, to be completely honest. Anyway, Lewis, shout out number 2. Immortals Fenyx Rising comes out the very day this podcast is released, Lewis. It's currently sitting at a 76 on PS5, a 75 on Switch, a 78 on PC, and an 82 on Series X. Interestingly, the Series X has the most reviews, the highest score, but its discrepancy with the PlayStation 5 is huge. You don't normally see that in the consoles, you know? So it's went from a 76 on the PlayStation 5 to an 82 on the Series X for some reason. I don't really know why that is. However, reading the reviews again, it seems fine, honestly. It seems like a totally fine game. This sort of reminds me of reading the Watch Dogs Legion reviews, and I was sort of thinking, oh, it's a bit underwhelming, but it's basically fine. This is pretty disappointing for me, because I actually thought that this game could have been a bit of a breaking of the mould for Ubisoft. It was quite a different looking, different style of game than what we are used to from them. But in actual fact, it seems to be much more of a Breath of the Wild clone than I was hoping or expecting that it would be, with less good exploration and less good puzzle solving than was in Breath of the Wild, which is what made that game so great. It doesn't really seem to stand on its own 2 feet, which is probably the most disappointing thing. And ultimately, it will be forever on the shadow of Breath of the Wild, and it will be a game that will be remembered as the time Ubisoft tried to make a Breath of the Wild game, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's fairly damning criticism in a sense that they tried to do what Breath of the Wild did and kind of missed some of the key things about. I saw one description of it as they thought that being able to climb anything was the key thing rather than making you want to climb everything, and that is basically the fundamental difference.
Yeah, I mean, that is probably pretty good criticism, I would say, because the fact that you can climb everything in Breath of the Wild is not in and of itself remarkable, although it is actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's not why the game is great, though.
No.
You know, it's sort of a fundamental misunderstanding of why games are great, and we see this time and time again from like big, huge publishers, is that they misunderstand why great things are great. It's like, oh, it must be because you can climb everything. It's like, well, no, it's not that, is it? It's because the world is amazing and you want to explore it. That's why it's amazing.
Yeah.
Ugh. Anyway, Lewis, moving on to shout out number 3, and a bit more disappointment. Empire of Sin also came out this week, and today, in fact, as we are recording this podcast, it's currently sitting at a fairly underwhelming 69 on Metacritic. It seems as though the actual mechanics of the game are good, and the style of it is cool. It has that 30s Prohibition vibe going on, which is really, really cool in my opinion. However, I've seen more than one review say that the UI is basically an absolute joke. And in a game like this, where you're interacting with the UI quite a lot, you're probably quite often in menus quite a lot, that is not a good thing. The game itself also seems to be quite buggy, and overall, not all that fun, which is pretty disappointing. Lewis, I know that you were relatively interested in this game. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm a bit disappointed, I'll be honest. I really want to dive into some of those reviews and kind of get to the heart of what some of those issues were, because there are definitely things about this type of game. It's a sort of, I think what they're describing as a mob management game. It's somewhere between an RTS and a sim type game, and for some people that's just not what they're into. And the common complaint that I've seen in the few reviews that I have read so far is that it's just wildly over complex, that it's trying to do far too much. It has a lot of good ideas, but they just swamp each other.
I think that is then exacerbated by the bad UI as well.
Well, it sounds like it, yeah. I mean, a bad UI in a game like this is fairly fatal. Yeah, I'm still going to look into it. I might still play it if some of those issues feel like they're not issues for me, but that they might be for other people. But yeah, I was hoping for a slightly higher score. Don't be a slave to that Metacritic, but yeah, there's
absolutely not, man.
A lot of games out just now to be trying out, you know.
Well, maybe down the line at some point, man, you should check it out, because it was one of the games that I remember you were being interested in basically since you first saw it
Absolutely,
at E3, a couple of years ago, you know? I do hope that you do give it a go at some point, but difficult to get around that Metacritic score, isn't it? You know, don't be a slave to that Metacritic, but when it's in the 6s, it's sort of difficult to ignore. Alright, and final shout out at number 4. The Cuphead DLC has been delayed, Lewis, until 2021. Studio MDHR have released this statement on Twitter.
While The Delicious Last Course is a continuation of Cuphead and Mugman's grand adventure, it's also a conclusion to the story that began on that fateful day at the Devil's Casino. In true Studio MDHR fashion, we aren't content for this final chapter to be anything less than our best work. Throughout development, we've challenged ourselves to put everything we learned from making Cuphead into the quality of The Delicious Last Course's animation, design and music. Meeting this standard has been extremely challenging for us amid the global pandemic that has affected so many of our fellow developers. Rather than compromise on our vision in response to COVID, we've made the difficult decision to push back the release of The Delicious Last Course until we are confident it will delight the Cuphead community the way we feel it should. We know many of you have been waiting to return to the Inkwell Isles, and our goal is to make the trip back there next year a truly magical one.
So the DLC was actually supposed to initially come out in 2019, then was delayed until 2020, and has now been delayed until 2021. And if you know anything about the initial release of Cuphead, it was delayed a hell of a lot as well. But like the Annapurna delays that we were discussing last week, I think it's much better that they get this DLC right, delay it and do it properly, and most importantly, around the COVID-19 pandemic, it is much more important that people are safe than the game is out quickly.
Yep, 100% agree, Mark. We've been waiting this long for it. It would have been great to play it this year, but next year will do.
Next year will absolutely do it, and I very, very, very much look forward to playing it. Alright, Liz, and on that note, time for a beer, and then we'll be back with Topic of the Week. And we are back for Topic of the Week. Topic of the Week this week is our play-along of Papers, Please, Lewis. Now, Papers, Please is a border checkpoint simulator, I guess, which came out in 2013 and was developed by Lucas Pope, who is a former Naughty Dog dev. The gameplay sees you play as a passport checker for people entering the fictional nation of Arstotzka. Is that how we're saying that, Lewis?
Let's go for that. We'll probably pronounce it different every time we say it.
But this fictional nation is obviously a stand-in for Soviet Russia, or one of the old Eastern Bloc, we shall say.
Yeah.
All you do is check documents. You check documents against other documents and check for discrepancies at your tiny workstation. And that is sort of all the gameplay is. The documents that you check continue to increase in complexity as the game goes on, but that is literally all you do. And if you're letting someone through, you give them a green stamp, or if you're sending someone back, you give them a red stamp. Just like borders in real life, eh? Another important point of the game is that you get paid per person that you let through. So you're incentivized to work quickly as well. And this money is important because it goes to keeping your family alive, which is sort of the secondary gameplay loop, perhaps. But if you make more than 3 mistakes, they will start to dock your wages, so you definitely have to be correct and fast, which is a very interesting pressure the game puts you under immediately. Now, Lewis, I feel as if I have almost described the entirety of Papers, Please without describing any of Papers, Please. Because while that is basically the whole game, and I mean, please jump in if you feel as if I'm missing anything glaring here, but that also doesn't describe the game in any way at all, does it?
Yeah, I mean, you're right, it's difficult to sum up what this game is, because if you've never heard of this and you just listen to that description, or if someone came up to you in the street and told you that was a video game, you'd probably think,
it sounds awful.
I'm never going to touch that, why would I ever play that?
And honestly, it is quite a miserable experience to play. Like, I wouldn't describe this as a happy gameplay experience in any capacity.
Not at all. I mean, that's one of the first things to mention, but it's just the kind of atmosphere that you are in this sort of dystopian, recently post-conflict nation that has all these issues with its neighbouring countries, and that's effectively why you're there. You're there to stop, quote-unquote, the wrong people, I guess, getting in, and obviously sometimes that leads to violence even within the game. But there is just this feeling of pressure and dread quite a lot of the way through the game, which only heightens then when you've got that secondary gameplay loop, like you say, where you're looking after your family and that kind of thing as well.
But the way this game makes you feel, like you said, dread is an important word, because everything feels bad. Do you know what I mean, to a certain extent? As I said, you are incentivized to work quickly, but you also have to be very, very accurate, because the more people you let through, the more money you get for your family. And while you have to pay rent every single week, you don't have to pay for food every single week, or you don't have to pay for heat every single week. And then sometimes they will get sick, and then you have to pay for medicine, and those are like the main things you have to pay for all the time. But if you don't make enough money, you have to make concessions there in some capacity. So you always feel under pressure. And I suppose how the game tells its story is through the characters that you're letting in and out. And basically, the overarching story, I suppose, is that some resistance group to this nation has sprung up, and they are using your checkpoint to let people in and out as they see fit to break the tyranny, for lack of a better term. But in the actual day-to-day, so to speak, you are in a very cramped location. Like, all the documents you pull up take up a lot of space on the screen intentionally, so that you're always having to shuffle them around. Like, somehow the game makes you feel claustrophobic. It's quite bizarre, and you always feel as if you're looking through like a lot of documents all the time. There's a rule book there that you have to be on top of. You have to query people correctly to get the right information out of them. It's surprisingly, I'm not sure even if tense is the right word, but pressure. Like, you feel a pressure when you play.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's got that pressure that, you know, working a job like that would have in real life. And we've both worked in retail, and at this time of year, working in retail is a nightmare. And it's got that same sort of thing of, like, I have to do all of these actions, and I have to do them really quickly. That's kind of the key thing. But also, if I am inaccurate, it is going to cost me heavily. And that's the fundamental trade-off that you've got. Then what the game does so brilliantly, I think, is it starts to layer in all these other considerations, essentially through the story. But as you say, Mark, there's the introduction of this group. You're never very sure if they're good or bad. I mean, you're being told by certain things within the game and certain intertextual things that you pick up on that the state is the problem, and rebelling against the state might be, quote unquote, the good thing to do. But you are constantly put in the position of thinking, I could let this person through even though their documents aren't right, because they seem like they need it, but it is going to hurt me and it's going to hurt my family. And when you start to play those things off against each other, oh man, is that a game.
That is always the thing that you're juggling, isn't it? It's like, I could let this person through, but this will now cost me money against my family. As I said, you can only make 2 mistakes before they start docking your pay.
Yeah.
So if you've already made 2 mistakes and then someone's come along and said, oh, for X, Y, and Z, very good reason, I have to get through here. And you're like, well, if I let you through, I get less money for my family now.
Yeah.
So this is a non-trivial decision.
Even if you've not made the mistakes up till that point as well, though, like, because there's a certain amount of random generation, if the person comes in first, say, of your day of work, you're almost gambling that you won't make enough mistakes for that one to matter.
Yeah,
which,
exactly.
again,
Yeah,
it's just
absolutely.
you're constantly balancing, like, what are the actions I want to take? What sacrifices am I actually willing to make here?
It also speaks a lot about being stuck in a system as well, doesn't it? Which, talking about a lot of systemic issues this year, has come up, hasn't it? In this particular situation, you're stuck in a totalitarian system that you might not want to be in. Like, my character didn't, because I didn't want to be, and therefore I was all for the resistance group. But my character as well, when a guard came up to me and said, well, if you send people who have discrepancies in their documents to the gulags, we get more money.
Yeah.
So you should do that. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Then the first time I did that, it was... the character was like presented as an old woman, right? But these characters are procedurally generated, so I'm pretty confident it could hold like basically anyone. But the shutters come down when you send them to the detention centre or whatever it is, and she refused to leave for whatever reason. And the guard came in and hit her in the face and then pulled her out. And I was like, oh, that wasn't great.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, it's sort of... I don't want this to become a whole big political thing, right? But it's sort of like a police situation at that point, isn't it? It's sort of like, oh, well, they did the wrong thing, so whether or not I actually think they deserve this button says that they should go to the detention centre, so off they go to the detention centre, totally removing you from any responsibility. And I actually did that quite a lot, and then by the end of the game I thought, God, I sent a lot of people to that detention centre. And you never see them. Like, they just vanish. As is with real life, they just vanish into a room and then you never have to deal with them again. But you don't really know what the outcome of the rest of their life is, which is probably pretty bleak.
Yeah.
That weirdly got me thinking about like actual real issues in real life, and I was like, fuck, this game came out in 2013 and this is quite relevant right now in a weird sort of way. So yeah. I
mean, I think that's spot on. That is, to me, that's the heart of what this game is, and it's why it was popular when it came out. It was critically acclaimed. It has sold well for an indie game, and I think it is because it does this thing that games can't often do too well, really, but it just puts you right in the position of a character, a completely, by and large, non-verbal character. I mean, there's interactions with some of the people that come up, but basically...
yeah, there's pre-scripted language, but you are ostensibly a nameless, faceless character.
Yeah,
you know?
And you don't know what his or her perspective on the world is or any of that stuff, but what you do start to understand is there are people in front of me, and some of them are a pain in the arse, and some of them are okay, and some of them have got the right documents, and some of them don't. And what I have got is a sick son and a cold wife or whatever back home, and I've got to make certain decisions based on that. And so I'm exactly the same as you, Mark. This was my, I don't know, maybe fourth or fifth time playing it through, not in its entirety, like, because it's possible and quite easy really to get instant deaths and to not get through all 31 days.
Oh yeah, I definitely know that list. The first time I tried to play this, when I didn't really know what I was doing, several family members were dead and I was on a gulag within a week.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's it. And I think it's fundamentally because the game, it doesn't do the video game morality thing whereby all decisions are okay and you can play good or you can play bad and it kind of all pans out. In this game, you probably want to be what you and I would describe as good, what a liberal mindset would describe as the good thing, where you aren't a really harsh border controller, you are empathetic to the people approaching you and all that. But the game, it allows you to make those decisions, absolutely. But if you want to make those decisions and also survive, you are going to have to be extremely good. The game is making a point by that. It is not easy in the world of this game to be a good person, to do what you might think is the right thing.
No, it's not, because systemically you can't do that. Like,
no.
You're a cog in a machine that will not allow you to do that, you
absolutely
know? Which is in and of itself very, very interesting. What I will say as well is that the way that this game tells its story, which is almost entirely through its gameplay, is a very hard thing for big games to do. You know what I mean? A lot of big games don't even try and do it, you know what I mean? And I think that this game speaks a lot to Lucas Pope And I think that he is a very, very good dev, having only played this game, which is a very low budget game in reality, but he's just got it. Like, he clearly is a man with good ideas and knows how to express those ideas well through the medium of video games specifically. And I'm not sure whatever game dev magic you need in the world to be a properly good developer, but holy shit, in that one game, he has shown that he has it in spades. Like, he really, really does. And that has made me really, really excited to play Obra Dinn very, very soon, which was his next game, of course.
Yeah, well, having played both of them already, we'll talk about Return of the Obra Dinn at length next month, but there's similarities and there's a lot of ways in which these games aren't very similar. But I think that core thing that Papers, Please is doing about the marriage of gameplay with story and atmosphere, the fact that finding out the rules of what you have to do on this particular day at your checkpoint is very much connected to the news bulletin that you kind of get at the start of every day as well.
Absolutely.
And sometimes you get a visit from one of the ministry officials who comes and tells you something, and that is how the story is told.
It's even things like that, man. It's even things like that. It's not just, oh well, today is day 8 and you have to check the passport for this thing now, say. It's all tied into a little story as well, and there's always background to it. There's always a social reason, for lack of a better term, that these things are happening within the tiny little narrative of this game. It's just done so incredibly well.
Yeah.
At all points I'm like, oh, that was done really well, that was done really well, that was done really well. There's no bits where I'm thinking, oh well, he could have improved this. In actual fact, I'm looking at the game going, well, I'm not really sure how I improved that. It sort of is what it is to a certain extent, but God, he's absolutely nailed what it is.
Yeah,
you know?
well, that's it as well. Like, it's endlessly replayable. I mean, quite literally, there's an endless mode that you can unlock, and there's so much to discover. I mean, I first played this game more than 4 years ago, and playing it again over the last week or so, the moment where it introduces the idea that you have to turn some people away because they don't have the right polio vaccination.
That was so weird, man.
It's so strange, right? I had forgotten that was in the game because there is so many kind of cascading rules like that come in place, and I haven't played it since that first time years ago. And as soon as that came up, it changed my perspective in-game, where up to that point, you know, I'd tried to get away with the odd thing. I'd taken some of the EZIC group stuff, not all of it. I kind of botched that a little bit, to be honest, but when that thing came in about a virus, my 2020 instinct kicked in, and I was like, I have to keep these people out because it's going to be bad for everyone. And the fact that, like, 7 years after this game released, it could still be making me think like that about real life today situations is a real testament to what it's doing.
Yeah, it's incredibly poignant. And the fact that one of the people who you have to turn away is an anti-vaxxer as well. I was just like, oh, fair play, Mr. Pope. You've done this well.
Yeah, you predicted
for some
our
reason,
lives.
You knew everything was going to happen in 2020. But I think that genuinely that does point to how clever and how relevant the game is in talking about real things through the medium of video games and through such a ostensibly very simple video game. Do you know what I mean? But actually, like, hitting real social problems that we are dealing with right now, as well as in 2013, you know what I mean? And that game continues to make me think in that way even now, and it's just remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable. Alright, listen, now that we have finished singing the praises of Papers, Please, I'd like to remind everyone that you can find PlayersToo on all the social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PLAYERSTOO.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it really, really helps us out. It does a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And while you're over there as well, if you could leave us a little review as well, it really, really helps us out. I know I say this every week, twice a week, but it genuinely does help us out. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. It really genuinely does mean a lot, and you are a legend to us. And Lewis, as we have already said, our play-along game for next month will be Return of the Obra Dinn, which is Lucas Pope's second game after Papers, Please. So after absolutely falling in love with Papers, Please, quite frankly, I am very, very excited to play this now. I was always excited to play this. To be honest with you, this was the game that I wanted to play more out of the two of them. And now that I love Papers, Please way more than I thought that I would, I am really excited to play this, man. I really am.
I'm so glad to hear that. I have to admit, I was a little nervous about what your take on Papers, Please was going to be, just because of the type of game that it is, and that it's not very complex mechanically, but there's so much going on there.
It's not. It's also totally not fun to play, but it's brilliant. Like, it's absolutely brilliant.
But having already played Return of the Obra Dinn, I will play it again because it's absolutely fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to what your take on that is going to be particularly.
Like, I'm absolutely buzzing to play this. This might be one of our play-along games that I have most looked forward to playing. I'm really, really genuinely looking forward to playing Return of the Obra Dinn. I really, really am.
Nice one.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you next week.
Thanks.